Hey everybody, it's Mike. Welcome back to the shop. Today's task at hand is going to be repainting this quarter on my 2011 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited. The license plate used to reside, the factory license plate mounted right here, and I got dinged, I don't know, a few weeks ago, probably a little longer than that ago. It's probably been a few months ago now, for the last letter of the license plate, the carrier blocking it slightly. So I took the factory mounted license plate housing off, mounted my license plate over here in the fabricated one, mounted it in the spare tire. But when I pulled the factory plastic housing off, I can see where it had been rubbing, and it rubbed through the clear and in a few spots even through the paint into the primer. So I put this little plastic plug in. This is just commercially available for the opening, but I'm going to sand this quarter down and repaint it and clear it. Pull the taillight off and get all that out of the way while I'm at it. Now, one thing that is kind of nice is I've got a body seam right here between the actual quarter and the corner. So I'll probably break, well, not probably, I'm going to break the edge right there, and then I'm going to loosen the shell and just raise it up a little bit, block it up, and then break it at the seam where the soft tops clip underneath, and then right here in the door opening. So I've just got this little area to do, but I'm going to take you along and kind of show you the process of how I go through and get this all prepped, painted, cleared, and put back together. So I'll bring the camera in here closer, and probably what I'll do is I'll probably get a plastic bag thrown over the Jeep real quick and just exposing this corner, and then I'll get it all. You don't need to see a video on removing the tail light and all that kind of stuff, and I'll get all that done, and then bring you back in when I'm getting ready to start actually doing the repair. So the tail light's removed. I got the plastic cover off. I also removed my old CB antenna mount that I put on years when I first got the Jeep. Now, that being said, the paint's in good shape around it, but I've got these two holes to contend with. Now, some people will just go ahead and hit that with a MIG welder, and probably both of those, and weld them right back up. But I'm going to show you the proper way to do this. A little more time consuming, but ideally you kind of want these thicknesses to be the same. This is roughly 19 gauge. I've got some 43 thousandths sheet that I'm going to use. But what you want to do is you want to make a plug to put in there and then weld the perimeter and then metal finish it, especially on a black vehicle. And here's why: because metal, as we all know, expands and contracts. But when you start getting multiple layers or thicknesses of that, things are going to expand and contract at different rates. So it may not be next week, next month, maybe even next year, but a few years down the road, especially on a black vehicle that attracts heat, and that there's a good possibility that will show through, because they're going to expand and contract at different rates. The base color won't expand and contract at the same rate because the metal isn't expanding and contracting at the same rate. So when I was building street rods and everything, my 40 Shiv was riddled on the one quarter with bullet holes, like 22 caliber bullet holes, and I had to go through and make all these plugs and weld them and then metal finish them, or hammer finish them, whatever you want to call, planish them in. So now this is a little more problematic because there's a dual layer behind here, so I can't get back behind really to back it up. So I measured this one. This one's about 3/8, and this one here is about 3/16. So measuring that, yeah, that's about 3/16, and that's just right over 3/8. That's like 385, about 390 thousandths. So for the smaller one, I've got my Roper Whitney. That's when I actually bought this, was back in the 90s when I did my street rod, because like I said, it had so many bullet holes in it, and so I bought this Roper Whitney punch, and so I got the 3/16 inch die-in anvil in here, and I just used, like I said, just some 18 gauge P&O, and knocked out a little plug for that, that will fit right inside there. I don't want to put it in right now because it'll fall through. So there's that one. And then for the 3/8 one, I took a, what is that? 9/16. Yeah, like a 9/16 rotobit, Hogan rotobit, and the inside was 3/8. So I cut the plug out and made a 3/16 plug for it. I made 2 of them while I was at it, and that'll fit right in there. And then I'll just use a little magnet to hold it in there, weld around the perimeter, metal finish it, and Bob's your uncle. So probably won't, I shouldn't even need filler on this. If everything goes plan, I'll probably just put a little bit of primer over it and block it. But that's how I'm going to fill these in. So I'm going to go ahead and knock the paint off around these 2 areas and get them prepped for paint. Also, while I was at it, the original, I had caught the original license plate frame. It came out flush with my bumper out here, and I had caught it a couple of times, and it pulled it, and it kind of deformed the metal here where there's some little J clips went into and screwed the clip to. So what I did is I went ahead and got a body dolly back in behind here and just kind of hammered it out and got it all back uniform again to the factory shape. So just in case I ever want to put an original license plate frame back on it, I can. But until then, I will go ahead and use this Mopar plug in it. I mean, if I was 100% sure I wasn't going to put the license plate back here or anything, I could go ahead and weld this up while I'm at it. But being black and this, I'm going to go ahead and just keep this plug or this plastic cap there. Just give me that option. So I'm going to go ahead and knock the paint off of these and get the welder ready, the TIG welder, and to weld these in. And then I can lift the shell up a little bit, get some tape put around here, and get this all sanded down and ready for some epoxy primer. I went ahead and taped up my plug so I wouldn't get anything on it, and then I'll stuff some paper back in behind here and tape this from the back side before I spray it. So let's get ready to weld that in. All right. Well, like they say, no turning back now. You don't want to grind too much of the metal away because you don't want to change the thickness of that. So I just went ahead and knocked it out. I probably ought to take that out just a little bit further because that's going to get warm. There we go. All right, I apologize. You're going to have to listen through the camera. The wireless mic on my lavalier, the antenna broke again, so I don't have time right now to repair that. So I will fix that as soon as I get this done. So for the time being, I apologize for the sound quality. Anyway, so I've got the plug fit in the hole. I got a magnet holding it in place. I step down to a 1/16th tungsten. 2% lanthanate is what I pretty much stick with. I've got some 030 ER70S2 wire here. So we're going to put a couple tacks around this. So, that one, the small one's done, and I'm about 2/3 of the way around the large one here. So I'm going to go ahead and finish it up. full penetration. You don't want to blow through, but you definitely want to get full penetration on it. And then I keep a cool, just a wet towel handy, cool it off. I like to keep it with there where you can touch it with your hand. Lower one isn't even going to need any filler. It's just going to be, I'll sand this paint back, and then it should just be some filler, or excuse me, some primer surfacer, and block it, and that's what I'll try to get for the top one as well. Best I can tell, I got all the way around it. So now, once you get, oops, it's still showing up. Okay, so once you get the welding done, and like I said, it took me probably, I'd weld maybe, I don't know, 3/30 seconds to, maybe 3/30 seconds or so of an inch to 1/8 of an inch is all. And then I'd cool it, and I'd jump over here, and I'd bounce around so I wouldn't expand it and either bulge it out where that plug is or pull the metal back in. So I said the bottom one was about perfect. So now you don't want to just come in here and start grinding on it, because heat from the grinder is just as detrimental as the from the welder. So what I'll do is I'll come in now with a like an 1/8 inch grinding disc on a die grinder, and you'll notice I'll just hit the high spots, not necessarily the surrounding. Leave it just a little high. Keep moving around on it, because you don't want to cut anything. You're just trying to knock the top, where the weld stands proud. You just want to knock that down. If you stay in one spot too long, it will actually start grinding a groove in it, which is not what you want to do. Close out there. Close here, I think. I can tell my neighbors are a couple days early on fireworks. I got a little pinhole there I'm going to hit. But other than that, I think that's pretty much about got it. Like I said, other than being low from the surface of the paint, that you can't feel any. You really can't feel any variation from either one of those two holes, any ripples. All you can feel is coming off the paint, it's a little low, coming back on the paint, it's a little low. So, that's pretty much completed as far as the welding those plugs in is concerned. Yeah, it looks good there. Alright, so I've got my workstation set up here, and I'm going to go ahead and mix up some of the epoxy primer so that it can, it's got to sit for a 30-minute induction. It has a 30-minute induction period, so I'm going to mix it up while I mask this back quarter, and then I'll spray a couple coats of the epoxy primer on, and then also I'll get a little acid brush or a little brush and brush some in the back side and let it run down through that dual wall in the back there by the tail light, where I couldn't get a body hammer back in behind, but I should be able to get a little brush in there and brush some of this on the back side and give it a good corrosion barrier. Sometimes, I mean, shakers work good, but sometimes the shakers don't get everything down in the bottom. So you want to get down to the bottom of the can, also around the crimp, kind of scoop it all in the middle and get it all stirred up well. This SPI epoxy primer gets mixed 1-to-1. So like I said, I don't need very much, so I've just got a little 8-ounce mixing cup here. It does have the 1-to-1 graduations printed on the side. So I'm going to use that. Getting close. I can't really feel much in the bottom anymore, but I've got a little bit left on the bottom of the stick. So you want to make sure and get all the solids mixed in, otherwise you're kind of defeating the purpose of using a good quality epoxy primer. Actually, you're kind of defeating the purpose of using anything if you leave solids behind, because the solids are what stay when all the carriers and the reducers flash off. The solids are what's left behind. So if you leave it in the bottom of the can and don't mix it in, you're really not putting it on the vehicle. Yeah, I can't really feel any more down in there, but yeah, it's good. Thing I like to do is poke a couple of small holes in there around the perimeter, allow it to drain back down in. One-to-one. Like I said, it probably got a little overkill here on this, but I want to put a couple coats on that and brush some in behind. Plus, while I'm at it, I got thinking about it. When I built my aluminum license plate holder on my spare tire there, I just used raw aluminum, and through the winter, that was back in November, and through the winter it's got a little bit of, it started to corrode just a little bit because it was uncoated. So I'm going to bead blast that, give it a good couple of coats of DP, or excuse me, not DP, SPI's epoxy primer. I'm speaking in PPG because that's what I've used for the last 33 years. So this SPI stuff's fairly new to me here. Anyway, I want to bead blast that aluminum license plate bracket and shoot a couple of coats of epoxy primer on it, and then a couple of coats of base and a couple of coats of clear. And then when the license plate mounts to it with the stainless steel frame with the lighting, it should look really nice and protect from the elements. So, all right, so I'm going to give that a 30-minute induction. I'll stir it periodically, and I'm going to go over to the Jeep and start masking that back quarter. And I probably don't need to mask the whole thing for this little corner. I'll pull it outside the shop hit it with a couple of coats, so I'll probably mask the back and maybe halfway up the front, or up the side I mean, towards the front, just to put the primer on it. Put a couple of coats of this on tonight, and then probably tomorrow I'll put some of the 2K primer on it, and then let it sit over, well, probably till first of the week, so that way it'll sit for a couple of days. And then I should be able to come in, block that down. Like I said, there's really not there's no filler to be added or anything to this, so I'll come back in and block it, probably some 180 lightly and a guide coat, and then go right to some 400 wet, and everything should block right out nice and neat and clean, and then wipe it all down, and I'll mix up a little bit more of this and reduce it as a sealer, and probably 3 coats of the DVC black, and probably 3 coats of clear, maybe 3 or 4 coats of clear, at least 3, and call it good. Should look as good as the day it rolled off the Sherman floor after, and then left out this couple of scratches, and hopefully be good for another 150,000. All right, let that sit. For primer gun, I've got a Seda. It's an old gun, but it's great. It works really good. I've used this. It's been painted a lot of vehicles. This is my primer gun, and then I've got my Wada gravity feed. It's not an HVLP, but it's a gravity feed. That's my good gun. My favorite go-to was a Sharp. I really liked that Sharp back in the 90s, and then I don't know, probably mid-late 90s, I went to a paint seminar that my local paint supplier put on, and for the class they were letting us demo these new Iwatas, and at the end of the class, if you took care of the gun, you used the same gun over the period of a 3-day course, and I kept mine really cleaned up nice and neat, and at the end of the class, if you wanted to purchase that gun, they let you have it for half price. So mine was like a brand new gun, so I bought it, and that was 25 years or 23, about 23 years ago or so. And man, it's been an awesome gun, although like I said, I haven't painted much in the last 5 or 6 years, but through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, I was doing a lot of paint jobs, and pretty much anything I was building I was painting, because I wouldn't build it and then have somebody else paint it. Alright, so for the most part I've got it masked. Got a little tear right there. Don't want to make sure we address that. So I've got everything masked. On edges like this, I don't like right here, I don't want to have a definitive straight edge. Over here on this corner isn't bad, because when I come in to block it, I'll basically block to a body line, and then the edge I'm going to go to is about 1.5 inches around there, where I'm going to break the color in the clear. But the paint's not wrong, so I'll just be able to wet sand all this area here. But wherever I've sanded here, I'm going to hit with the epoxy primer. But like I said, I don't want a definitive edge, because then when you're sanding it, you're sanding parent material or OEM finish here, primer here, you will actually sand in a definitive line. So I want to soften that edge. So I back mask this to create a soft edge. So I'll come in and I'll hit it, the primer will go in around, but it'll create a soft edge. I'll do the same thing up here once I get the back prep. But for right now, I took just an acid brush, bent it at a 90, and I'm going to come in and brush, reach in the back side there, and just very liberally apply the epoxy primer. I'm actually putting it up even at the top and just kind of letting it run down and coat the back. So I want to get that all the way coated in there where I weld, the back side of where I welded, for corrosion protection. Okay, so I think I got that good now. I'm going to go ahead and tape this up so I don't have overspray a little back in here. Again, I'll create a soft edge over here and a soft edge here. Put a couple coats of epoxy primer on it. All right, so I've got two wet coats on there. So I'll let this sit overnight and then hit it with some 2K primer. And like I said, this just makes a nice soft edge. And then so I don't spray directly in behind it, I kind of sprayed at this angle perpendicular to it so that it goes in and creates that soft edge. All right, well, I think I got my mic working again. So we're gonna put the last coat of epoxy on. Okay, go ahead and hit the license plate while I'm at it. Okay, so now we're going to come in here and mix up some 2K primer, and this is mixed at a 4:1. So before I do that, I'll get some cleanup thinner prepared. I just use this little this old mixing cup as my cleanup container where I break my gun down and put it in there. It's all of these have seen a little bit of use, but anyway, so I'm going to mix this up at a 4:1 ratio. So I'll just look at the gradations on here and think, there's the activator, there's the primer. So do the same thing. We're going to make sure we stir it up thoroughly and bring all the solids up from the bottom. And I got it in the gray. It comes in gray, black, gray, black, I think red oxide, and I can't remember the other one. I don't know that it's white or not, but I can't remember. So it's definitely thick, but it stirs up, it mixes up nice. I've already got pretty much the bottom of the can stirred in. Another thing I like to do, you don't have to, but on these caps, they have a little locking tab. I mean, they're also sealed, but they have a little locking tab that you have to squeeze in to go past this little detent here. They can kind of be a pain in the butt over time, so I usually just go in with a pair of dikes and cut that little tab off. Okay, 1 part activator, and just mix it in. I've got the shell lifted up here so I'll actually mask this area right here, and the paint will go up underneath the flange that catches like for the soft tops. So I won't have any paint on top of here, it'll just go up underneath and around, and I'll break it at this corner here. So I've broken the edge here a little bit with some 220. Now I'm going to come in with 400 wet sandpaper and sand this whole area here and get it all prepped for sealer and paint. Couple things worth mentioning here. I like to get my paper, my sand, I kind of guess how much I'm going to need, and I'd probably throw an extra piece or two in there. But I like to get it into the water a good 20-30 minutes before I'm going to start my sanding. That way it kind of softens the paper up a little bit, and you're not fighting with like wrinkly, crunchy wet sandpaper. It's a little more pliable, especially for like getting in around these curvatures and so forth. It really works much better for getting in around those. Couple other little tips. The only time I'll usually sand, and granted there's exceptions, but generally the only time I'll usually sand without a block is in these little areas like so, where you kind of have to get your finger in around, because it's kind of twofold. You've got to get the original paint sanded and deglossed, but you've got to get in there and sand that primer that you put in there as well and blend everything, because if you're not, you're definitely going to lift an edge in these corners here. Now granted, where the tail light goes over the top of these, it may not be quite as much of an issue, but it's just not worth the gamble. So I like to get in there and just really sand those interior curvatures, keep the paper cleaned out. Knock the gloss off all the original clear. Get it all ready to accept the seal coat and the paint. So that's good there. You can't feel it. It's knocked the gloss off. Now, like I said, I like to use a block. There are sometimes on some like curvatures and something in some areas like that, that a block is going to put gouges in, so you kind of have to either use a flexible sanding block or you can use your hand. As a general rule of thumb, you never want to get your fingers in there sanding. You will literally cut grooves in them. So you want to kind of grab it, and you want to use this part of your hand when you do sand in this fashion. Now I should be using a block right here, but I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. But you can see I kind of just grabbed it right in there. And you want to use the flat of your hand, and you don't want to go in repetitive patterns. I like to go in an X. You just don't want to cut a pattern into what you're trying to sand. So kind of in an X pattern there. Doesn't take much on this area that we didn't have any body work on. You're just basically trying to knock the gloss off of that black, off that clear coat. Get in around these little raised bosses where the clips go for the screws for the tail lights. Okay, so we'll just progress around like that. Big flat areas. Like to use a block and fold it into thirds. Like so. You got a nice flat block there to go ahead and hit. And if you remember, this is the area that had the body work. Sometimes a drop or two of Dawn dishwashing soap in the water helps as well, but you can see there was no body filler, no nothing in that area, and all we've done is just some epoxy primer followed by a little bit of 2K polyurethane primer. And that area is repaired and ready for. Now also, you can kind of gauge what it's going to look like by putting a shine to it with wet water and look down it. And that's flat as flat can be. So that area is done. I just got to get a little bit right here on the tail light. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this out and come back when it's time for final masking. Okay, so I got it masked. I pulled it out of the shop, sprayed 2 coats of epoxy primer on it, the SPI epoxy primer. I used my regular paint gun for that. I did not use my primer gun. I added maybe 5% of reducer just to help it lay down and flatten out. And the sealer laid down exceptionally well. I'm happy with it. That sealer really is a nice sealer. Epoxy primer really is a nice primer. And then, like I said, reduce it just about 5%, and it helps it flatten out, lay right down as a sealer. For that, I use my Wada W400 gravity feed gun. It's not an HVLP, but it's just a gravity feed. This is a great gun. I've had this gun probably 15, 18 years. I love it. This thing is awesome. It's well balanced. You can go to an overgrip for getting down underneath. It's easy to extend and get a perpendicular pattern down. It's well balanced. Like I said, the cup you don't feel like the cup's gonna drip. Like with a gravity feed, sometimes that tube in there, you worry about it dripping if you get out over a hood or something. This thing, it's just easy, very easy to lay down nice. Like you see, you go to an overgrip and come down underneath where the bodies roll under. It's light, like I said, it's just a great gun. So one other thing I wanted to touch on that I don't think I showed when I originally wiped everything down. Tack cloths. I think I mentioned I'd use a tack cloth to tack everything. You want to tack it before you go to your sealer, and then tomorrow before I put the paint and clear on, I'll tack it again. But tack cloths, a lot of times people will pull these right out of the package where they're tacky like a cheesecloth, hence the term tack cloth. They're folded up so they fit in those nice flat little packages. I've seen people pull those out, grab them, and go right to town wiping. You don't want to do that. The substance on them can actually smear on your surface, and I've seen people have streaks. They can't figure out what's going on, and it comes to find out they transferred some of the composition that's on the cheesecloth, on the tack cloth. They've transferred that to their surface. What you want to do with these tack cloths, open them all the way up. Every little fold, open them all the way up, and I'll just leave them sit and kind of air dry. I'll do this while I'm mixing things up. Let them sit for about a half an hour. And that way they kind of, some of that stuff will evaporate off. But then when you go to tack it, excuse me, when you go to tack, you don't want to just wad it up. I'll just grab it into like a loose ball, like so, and just come in and tack, get your surface clean. And then kind of the same thing, just kind of turn it around if I'm doing a whole car. And I mean, this thing I've done a couple of spot jobs, and it's still tacky, it's still good. Put them in a Ziploc bag, and they'll last for quite a while. So, like I said, the main thing I've seen people do is pull those right out of the package, fold it up, and start smearing away. And that's the last thing you want to do. You want to let it kind of dry and put it into a loose ball. So that being said, the sealer's on it for tonight. It's masked, sealed. I think I'm calling it a night. Tomorrow when I get home from work, I'll mix up some color. I'm just going to shoot some DBC, which is PPG's paint, base coat. I'll mix this up 1-to-1 with the, I'm actually just going to use the SPI's 885 warm weather reducer. It's mixed 1-to-1, and then I'm going to activate the base. So to activate the base, what you want to do is take, for every reduced sprayable quart, you want to put about 1 ounce of activator. And I just use the same activator I'm using in the clear, the slow activator. So for this little job, I'll probably mix up half a quart. I'll probably put 3 coats or so on it. So I'll mix up about a half a quart. So I'll put about 1 cap full of this in that. That's about half an ounce. So if you want to do a full quart, you do 2 of these caps, and that activates the base coat. All right, I apologize guys, I'm not wearing my wireless mic for this because I'm going to be taking my mask on and off. But what I've done is I've mixed up the DBC, PPG's DBC. This is just a 9700 black. I mixed it up 1-to-1 with the slow reducer. And then I put about a cap full of the slow activator for the clear, which activates the base. You're going to get a better bedding down of the base color. It's not going to be as brittle, so it's going to give some flexibility. So for rock chips, things of that nature. And also it's going to have a better chemical bond to the clear when the clear is applied. So it may extend out the flash times slightly. If I remember right, it was like 10 to 15 minutes for the base, but if it's activated, it's like 15 to 20. So it does extend out the dry time between coats, the flash time between coats, and tape outs. If you're doing multi-colors, keep that in mind because it will affect how fast you can get on it with tape. I think it extends it out from 40 minutes or so. Don't quote me on this, you might have to look it up. I think it's like 40 minutes or so with the non-activated DBC. But if you put the activator in it, it pushes it out to like an hour before you can get on it with tape. So keep that in mind if you're doing multicolor or two-tone, or like I say, anytime you're going to be doing tape outs on it. So keep that in mind. So, and I've also broke out my Iwata W400 gun. I used it for the sealer yesterday, and I'm going to use it again for paint and clear. I believe this has a I believe it's a 1.4. I believe it's a 1.4 tip on it. My primer gun, when I was using it, I believe it's a 2.4. Maybe this is a 1. Maybe this is a 1.6. I can't remember. But it's definitely, you're not going to put primer through this gun. Number one, you shouldn't. It's best to keep a separate gun for primers anyway. But okay. So let's give that another stir. I'm going to go ahead and pull the Jeep outside now. Give it a good tack. Remember what I mentioned about the tack cloths? Okay, again for tacking, you don't want to press real hard. You basically just want to kind of drag, you want to float it across the surface. That's all you want to do. Alright, another thing to keep in mind is you want to strain everything that goes into your cup. So make sure you're straining everything that you're putting in the cup. Alright, so curiosity was getting to me. I mentioned in the last segment my gun. Yes, the Iwata has a 1.4 nozzle or tip on it. My regular Seda primer gun has a 1.8, and my heavy duty Seda primer gun has a 2.4. So this is for the really high build. This is like spraying body filler practically. And this one here is what I usually use. This is my Seda. I'm not sure what model this one is. I've had this in LMS. Yeah, LMS. And this is the KL. The one for with the 2.4. 2.4 I think it is a KL. The one with the 1.8 is a LMS. And then again, my Iwata that I use for painting color and clear is a 1.4, which is what you want. You don't want to, it says that right even in the literature for this universal clear, you don't want to shoot anything larger or smaller than 1.4. And that's the other thing I read in there is, I'm used to putting a tap coat of clear on for the first coat, let it get sticky, and then come on, a couple minutes later, come in with 2 to 3 medium wet coats. This one here, it says go right on to a full wet coat. Let it flash for 10 to 30 minutes. It's about 90 here today, low 90s maybe. So I'll probably let that go 10. On my base I went 15 minutes between coats. I put 3 coats on. So I'll probably let it go about the same on this. Maybe closer to 20 on this because I really want this to, I don't want to do a lot of cutting and buffing on this. I want to leave as much material on it as I can. See this on the Jeep and it might get scratched down the road. So, like I said, this is mixed 1 to 1. I'm using a slow activator. And then you want to adjust about 120 PSI at the wall, which I already have. I know I have that. And then you want to, basically you want to open up your fan and you want to open up your fluid nozzle and let it come out. You want to lay it on clear and I wouldn't say heavy, but you want to put a good medium wet coat on to a full wet coat. And then let it flash for 10 to 30 minutes and then put another one on. I'm going to mix up enough to do maybe 3 coats. That's what I'm going to shoot for is 3 coats on this. So. I can see the bottom of the can. That's a good sign. It's definitely clear. Some of them you can have a little bit of a tinge to them or a tint. This is definitely clear. Again, 1 to 1 is what you want to mix this at. Slow activator. Right there. 1 to 1. Mix it up good. And then again, straight into the cup. You always want to straight into the cup. Some people, I've read on some of the forums, that people are reducing this down 5 to 10% with some slow reducer. I used to do that with the PPG stuff. I'd over-reduce just the last coat, put about 10% of the 898, which was a really slow reducer, like 100 plus degree. I think you're better off on this, from what I've heard, is to use their retarder rather than over-reduction, just because if I over-reduce it, you're actually decreasing the solids that's coming out of your gun, because it's coming out by volume. So if you got more reducer coming out, you're going to have less, obviously less clearly, less solids. So you want to put as much clear in the vehicle as you can. So I'm going to try this at 1 to 1 full strength and see what it looks like. And if they go down nice and smooth without a lot of orange peel, I'll probably just continue on. If it looks like I might have to tweak it a little bit, I may play with my air pressure a little bit. If not, I might throw a little bit of reducer in. We'll have to see. I'm going to try not to. All right. Again, strain it into the cup. Always strain into your cup. Okay. And I'm going to give it a quick tack and we'll go to spraying the clear on it. Well, I'm not sure how good this is going to show up, but that first coat laid down exceptionally nice. Flat. Looks really good. So I put down, I wasn't afraid to put it down. I went ahead and put some down. Alright, I don't know if how this is going to show up here, but just got everything unmasked. You can see how good it turned out. I'll tell you, I shot that 1-to-1. I didn't reduce it at all. Shot it 1-to-1. It laid down beautifully. There's really, I'm not going to call it orange peel. It's got just maybe a little bit, but it matches the factory. If you look, maybe right there you can see a little bit over here, but then you look down the side here, and it kind of matches there's a little bit to the factory, so I don't know that I'm going to even cut and buff it. I got a little speck of dust here and one right here. I may hit that with some 1500 and maybe just breathe over it with the buffer, but I don't think I'm going to cut and buff that. It laid down so flat, and I don't want to take clear back off after all that. So if I don't need to cut and buff it, I don't think I'm going to. I'm afraid if I cut and buff it, it'll flatten it out too flat, and then it's not going to match the quarter or the tailgate. So I may just hit those couple of dust nibs, run the polisher over it, and put it back together and call it. But man, I'll tell you, that's for my first time shooting the SPI, the Southern Polyurethane. I'm impressed. It laid down beautifully, all the way from the epoxy, the 2K, and the clear. The clear, we'll see how it holds up long term, but boy, I tell you, PPG had better get their shit together, because I'm impressed with how this sprayed and how it laid down. And I've been a PPG fan for the last about 33 years I've been spraying. So anyway, I'll come back when everything's pretty much finished up. Maybe I'll show the little bit of buffing here, but we'll come back with the finished product. All right, so I apologize if it's a little noisy. It's mid-90s, 95, 96 degrees here today, and I've got the ceiling fans on. So anyway, I've got a little dust speck here and right there, and that's it. Other than that, this thing laid down beautifully. So I'm going to just hit them with some 2000. I've got some 2000 grit paper in the water already. So I'm just going to hit these couple little spots, and then I'm going to hit it with the buffer very lightly. I'm going to tape some of these edges so I don't get splatter all over and behind like this filler cap and so forth. And then let me walk you around over here. I've got a few spots over here on the wife's side that I've got some scratches. They're real fine, but just the same, they're scratches. I've got a couple through this area, one here. I think it's probably the same one because it's kind of hit and miss. And then this one is probably the same one as this one. And then I've got a couple here and one here. Oh, I'm going to grab a 10 mil or a 8 millimeter and pull that antenna off of there. But anyway, I'm going to hit these couple areas while I've got the buffer out. Here's my color sanding and buffing supplies. I just keep them in an old Holley carburetor box. But I've got some 1000, actually I got some 600 grit in here, and I've got 1000, 1200, 1500, and 2000 3M sanding paper. I've got a compounding, a polishing, and a microfinishing pad for my little 3-inch pneumatic. And then I've got compounding, polishing, and microfinishing for the big buffer. Here's my, I've had this for probably 20 years. It's a Black & Decker heavy series duty. It's actually a very well balanced machine. It varies between, it's got a variable speed between like 1000 and 2000, I think it is. Urethane, you have to run a little, you have to get it a little warm in order to flow the clear out when you're polishing. I'll usually vary depending on the area. A big flat door, I'm usually 17 to 1900 RPM. Small area like this, I'll probably 12 to 1400, moving it around. A wheel to keep my pads clean, and actually just an old stiff bristled hairbrush works good for these polishing micro finishing pads, the foam pads. They work really good, doesn't tear them up. So let me grab the compounds. Here's the compounds I usually use. I'll use the rubbing compound, with this, which this here will take 1,200 grit usually, and even starting at 15. I'll use this and a wool pad. Yep, there's one that's already been used. So I'll use this and a wool pad. Then I'll move on to the Finesse It, which is I'll use with a polishing pad, the yellow pad. And then I'll move on to the machine. You can use this foam pad with this also, but I usually like to use the yellow. And then I'll go on to the Perfect It, which is what I use with the foam pad, either the black or the white foam pad. Those work really good. Those will take any swirl marks out. Then I usually go over it lastly with some hand glaze, just by hand when it's finally done. So anyway, let me go over and scuff these couple spots down and start hitting with the buffer. Again, like I said, it's just got these couple little spots here, so I'm just going to take a little bit of 2000 grit, and I'm not going to pull it outside, so I'm going to try not to get too much water on my shop floor here, or stuff all over for that matter. Okay, and there's the other one. Again, I don't want to flatten this off too much because, there's one I missed, because the panel, the little slight texture of orange peel that you see in it right now matches the OEM finish perfectly. But I'm just afraid that if I color sand that whole corner, it will, in essence, make the panels not match, and you'll actually be able to see where the one panel was repaired. So, which is what we don't want to have happen. We want a seamless repair. I don't want anybody to know that I've repaired this. Okay, so let me get a little bit of masking paper on these couple areas and we'll hit it with the buffer. All right, so one thing you don't want to have is you want to make sure you get all your dried stuff from, you can reuse these pads over and over. I know some people don't. I do. I did most of it outside, but you want to get all the dried stuff out of it, because anything dried is going to be hard and you're going to scratch the hell out of the surface you're trying to polish out. So some people will run this right. I kind of turn it a little bit, maybe a 20-30 degree angle, so it really bites in and digs and fluffs that pad up nice and, like I say, really brings the fluff back up in the pad. Then you can do a couple ways. You can go ahead and put it on the pad. You can put it on the surface. I do, depending on the panel, I'll do either or, but to try to minimize sling. But you see, I just, no matter what I did, I just got it right there. Yeah, even as hard as I tried right there, still slung it. But look at that shine. It brought that shine right out. So hit just these couple little areas here. Now edge corners is where you want to be careful. You don't want to focus. You don't want to concentrate on corners. They get enough just by accident. Keep it going. Once you burn through, you're back to the drawing board. You're back to mixing up some more clear. Okay, I think now another thing, when you change compounds and pads, you want to wipe it down with a clean towel, because otherwise you're going to have that coarser grit. You're going to transfer that right into the next finer one, and you're kind of going to be defeating your purpose of going progressively step by step finer and finer. Wow, that really matches. I mean, I know it's black, but there are, contrary to popular belief, there are different shades of black and different qualities of black. I can't say about SPIs, I have not used it, but I've always been a believer that PPG's just traditional black is a little deeper black. That's the one I've always used when I did my wife's Thunderbird and everything back in the 90s. I always used the PPG black. Now that is about as perfect as a finish as you're going to get right there. So I've got a little bit of dieback right along the top edge here. I'm going to hit that probably, I don't think I'm going to hit it with this coarse stuff. I think I'm going to switch over to the Perfect It. Hit this area, and I'm going to hit the top edge of here, probably because this is a little more exposed to sun and so forth. Plus, when I used to run my soft top, getting in and out of there and everything, so I may have a few scratches in there. I'm going to hit that with the Perfect It and see if that'll take it out. All right, so moving on to the final step here. I'm going to hit this with the machine glaze now. And this tailgate has really come back to life. It was pretty faded out a little bit along the top here. And like I said, I used to have a Trek top with the angled slant, so the top of this tailgate got a lot of sun. Oh, and while we're talking about edges, you notice you got the edge here, the pad's spinning clockwise. You don't ever want to tip it in to where you're coming onto this edge. You want to be going off of it with the heel, or if you're going to be going off the front, you turn around. I'm left-handed, so I hold it like this, so I usually run the heel along the back there. Or if I'm coming the other way, if I need access, it's not that big a deal to switch it up and use off. But you want it going off that edge. You don't ever want to come back on. You'll burn this edge back in a heartbeat. And it doesn't take long. After a very little while, you'll get to feel your machine, the tone, the drag. You'll get to know when you're about ready to have to add a little bit more compound, and when you're done. It'll kind of, as you notice when I put it first on, it kind of hazed. Then I come back, and as I come back more and more, that haze disappears. And I'm basically just running it right up and off the edge of that panel. So there again, it's just about knowing your equipment, knowing what your machine's doing. So let's blow that off. And then once I get everything done, I'll come back with some hand glaze and go over it by hand. But there's really no swirl marks. There's no nothing on it at this point. That turned out pretty good there. Even though this is covered by the light, I still don't like leaving any rubbing compound or anything in the little nooks and crannies. Get all that stuff out of there and make it look like somebody give a shit about what you were doing. Oh, hell. That turned out beautiful. Wish the whole Jeep looked like that now. I got a couple scratches other places that I just wish it was all like this now. That turned out phenomenal. So let me go hit the other scratches. We'll come back and give her some hand glaze. And a good wash job and put the tail light back on. But yeah, that turned out good. See if I can take that and hopefully that'll really show up in the camera, but that looks phenomenal. So there's the finished product. Tail light back installed, little license plate cap, plug, whatever installed. All the over here it's all polished, and down the sides, really good reflection. Tailgate there. License plate frames painted. I do need to machine a couple of, I've got some nylon washers there for right now. I do need to, I want to machine some stainless ones. Here's the passenger side. I'll polish out. The passenger side actually had quite a few scratches in it. I thought it was just a couple here and then up here in the B pillar and a couple back here in the C pillar. But when I got going, there was little fine ones throughout it. So I pretty much went ahead and polished, and I had one right here by the fender and one up here by the antenna. So I went ahead and polished the hood, the complete hood, and this whole side and the rear. The driver's side was in really good shape. So that's a good reflection right there. And then I put my new, put my new Rubicon sticker on. The other one was starting to peel. The N on the R, and a little bit on the B was starting to peel. So I went ahead and pulled that off, polished the hood all out, and then put the new decal on. All right, well, that pretty much concludes touching up the rear corner and polishing out the paint and kind of pulling some scratches out of it and repairing where the license plate had rubbed through the clear. So again, this is the first time using SPI products. For the most part, I mean, not even for the most part, I was very impressed. We'll see how it holds up long term. Compared to like the PPG. The PPG 2021, DC 2021 has held up really good. I've used it in the past, and I mean, years later, when I usually don't wax my vehicles, I use a real mild polishing, a hand glaze. But I've had vehicles, my Suburban was 13 years old, or I'd had it 13 years old. It was actually, what was it? It was an 86, and I sold it in 09. So 23 years old when I sold it. I had it for 13, and it looked as good as the day I sold it. It looked as good as the day I rolled it out of the paint booth. So very impressed with it. We'll see how this holds up. But like I said, the epoxy, the 2K primer, the clear laid down beautifully. All of them very good products, very user-friendly. It goes to show that you can do this at home. You don't necessarily have to take it to a body shop. What I did was just a brief overview, but take your time, go through it. Step by step like that, and you can do it right there in your driveway or in your backyard, wherever. Just wanted to give you an idea of what it takes to fix a small damage or a small blended paint area on a vehicle. So anyway, thank you for watching, and if you have any comments, I welcome them, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.